two 16-year-old girls dressed in the quiet luxury of a life they've always known stand before an airline gate. They are brilliant, they are beautiful, they are black, and they hold first-class tickets to London. But to the woman in the uniform, they are a problem, a suspicion, a threat. In a voice dripping with condescending authority, she blocks them, questions them, and finally, with a smirk, denies them entry. What she doesn't know is that these are not just any two girls, and their father is not just any man. A single quiet phone call is about to be made, and in the next 10 minutes, every single flight for Apex Air nationwide will be brought to a screeching, unprecedented halt. The first-class lounge at John F. Kennedy International Airport was an oasis of manufactured calm. Muted jazz piano notes trickled from hidden speakers, mingling with the soft clink of porcelain and the hushed murmurs of the world's elite. For 16-year-old twins, Zola and Zara Devereaux, this was just another Tuesday. Zola, ever the vibrant one, scrolled through a fashion blog on her phone, her custom-beaded box braids clicking softly against her shoulders. She wore a tailored blazer over a vintage band t-shirt, a look that was effortlessly cool and impossibly expensive. Zara, her identical twin, was the quiet storm. She sat with a leather-bound journal open on her lap, her pen poised over a blank page. Her gaze was fixed on the sprawling tarmac outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, where massive Boeing 777s lumbered like gentle giants. She wasn't just looking. She was absorbing, analyzing the intricate ballet of ground crews, fuel trucks, and baggage carts. While Zola saw the world as a stage, Zara saw it as a complex system of interconnected parts. "Dad just texted," Zola said, not looking up. The Ethelred board meeting in London was moved up a day. He says to enjoy the extra 24 hours of freedom before he gets there. He booked the car to take us straight to the Connaught. "Good," Zara murmured, her focus still outside. More time for the V&A exhibit. Their lives were a series of such moments, seamless transitions between chauffeur-driven cars, exclusive lounges, and five-star hotels. Their father, Robert Devereaux, was the founder and CEO of Ethelred Technologies, a sprawling tech conglomerate with deep investments in everything from AI-driven logistics to aerospace engineering. His name didn't just open doors, it vaporized them. The girls had grown up knowing privilege, but Robert had worked tirelessly to instill in them a sense of gratitude and perspective. They volunteered, they excelled in their studies, and they were by all accounts exceptionally grounded for teenagers who had a private jet on standby. But today they were flying commercial. It was a grounding experience, as their father half joked. He wanted them to understand the world his company was helping to shape, not just float above it. Apex Air was one of Ethelred's key partners, utilizing their advanced logistical software to optimize flight operations. Flying with them was a show of corporate synergy. An announcement smooth as silk echoed through the lounge. Apex Air Flight 104 to London. Heathrow is now ready for first-class boarding at Gate B24. Zola snapped her phone shut. "Showtime. Let's see if British snacks are as bad as they say." Zara smiled, closing her journal. They gathered their carry-on bags of vintage Louis Vuitton for Zola, a sleek, functional Tumi for Zara, and made their way out of the serene lounge and into the controlled chaos of the main terminal. Gate B24 was a flurry of activity. Families were corralling restless children, and business travelers were talking loudly into their phones. The priority lane was short, and the girls stepped behind a man in a rumpled suit. When their turn came, they approached the counter, passports and boarding passes in hand. The gate agent was a woman in her late 40s named Brenda. Her name tag was slightly askew, and the smile on her face was a thin, brittle thing that didn't reach her tired eyes. She took their documents without a word, her gaze flickering from their passports to their faces, then back again. She scanned Zola's pass. Beep. Then Zara's. Beep. Her eyes narrowed. She tapped at her keyboard, a frown deepening the lines around her mouth. "There seems to be a problem with these tickets," she said, her voice flat and accusatory. Zola blinked. "A problem we checked in online this morning. Everything was confirmed." Brenda didn't look at them. She kept her eyes on the screen, typing with slow, deliberate keystrokes. "The system is flagging these seats. It says here they were purchased with a corporate account that has a fraud alert on it." Zara stepped forward, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the sudden tension. "That's not possible. The account is Ethelred Technologies. It's my father's company. There's no fraud alert." Brenda finally lifted her head, and for the first time she looked at them directly. It was a look that stripped away their first-class tickets, their designer clothes, and their privileged upbringing. It was a look that saw two young black girls and drew a swift, ugly conclusion. "Ethelred Technologies." She repeated, a hint of a sneer in her voice. She picked up their passports, flipping through them with theatrical slowness. "And what does your father do at this company, girls?" "He's the CEO," Zola said, her voice taking on a defensive edge. "Robert Devereux." Brenda let out a short, sharp laugh that was closer to a bark. "Right, and I'm the Queen of England. Look, I don't know what kind of scam you two are trying to pull, but this is a full flight. These are $10,000 seats." She pushed their documents back across the counter. "I'm going to have to ask you to step aside." The world seemed to slow down. The ambient noise of the terminal faded into a dull roar in Zola's ears. The humiliation was a physical blow, hot and sharp. They were being accused of being thieves, of not belonging in a space they had occupied their entire lives. "You can't be serious," Zola stammered, her face flushing with anger. "Call your supervisor. Check the account details. My father's name is on it." "I don't need to call anyone." Brenda snapped her authority, puffing her up like a toad. She gestured to the next passenger in line. "Next, please." But Zola and Zara didn't move. They stood there rooted to the spot, two pillars of disbelief and indignation. The dream of London, the excitement, the simple act of travelling it, was all dissolving into a nightmare right there on the worn carpet of Gate B24. And the worst part wasn't Brenda's accusation. It was the cold, dismissive certainty in her eyes. It was the way she had looked at them and decided in an instant who they were. And she was wrong, dangerously wrong. The line behind them was growing a shuffling, murmuring snake of impatient travellers. Faces were turning, some curious, some annoyed. Zola felt 100 pairs of eyes on them, and the heat of her embarrassment intensified. "Ma'am," Zara said, her voice low and steady, a stark contrast to the frantic pounding in Zola's chest. "We are not stepping aside. There is a mistake, and you need to fix it. The corporate account number is on the booking confirmation. You can verify it with your finance department." Zara's precision and vocabulary seemed to only infuriate Brenda further. It was as if their composure, their refusal to shrink under her accusation, was a personal affront. "Are you telling me how to do my job?" Brenda's voice rose, cracking the professional veneer she was supposed to uphold. "I've been working this desk for 15 years. I know a fraudulent ticket when I see one. The pattern is always the same." The implication hung in the air. Thick and poisonous people like you. Zola couldn't hold back any longer. "The pattern." "What pattern?" "The pattern of two black girls flying first class. Is that the pattern you're talking about?" A few people in line gasped. Brenda's face hardened into a mask of indignation. "This has nothing to do with race, young lady. It has to do with airline security and company policy. Now for the last time, please, move out of the way or I'll have to call security." "Call them," Zola shot back, her voice trembling with rage. "Call your supervisor, call security, call the CEO of this airline for all I care. We paid for these seats, and we are getting on that plane." The standoff was reaching a tipping point. Brenda, seeing she was losing control, finally reached for her radio. "Kevin, I need you at B-24. I have a situation." A few minutes later, a man named Kevin arrived. He was the shift supervisor, a man whose sense of importance was inflated by his slightly too tight uniform. He had a clipboard and an air of someone who solves problems by crushing them. Brenda spoke to him in a low, hurried tone, gesturing towards the girls. Zara could pick out phrases: refusing to move, claiming their father, obvious fraud. Kevin listened, nodding sagely. He didn't once look at the girls' booking information or ask for their side of the story. He approached them with the weary patience of an adult dealing with petulant children. "All right, ladies, what's the issue here?" he asked, his tone dripping with condescension. Zara calmly explained the situation for a second time. She pointed to the Ethelred Technologies name on their e-tickets, explained their father's position, and respectfully asked him to run the corporate account number, not just rely on the initial flag, which had to be a technical glitch. Kevin listened with a practiced, blank expression. "I understand," he said, the words a lie. "However, Brenda is our most experienced agent. If she sees a red flag, I have to trust her judgment. The system is showing a payment discrepancy. We can't let you board." "But it's a mistake," Zola insisted. "Can't you just make one phone call?" "Our hands are tied," Kevin said smoothly. "A perfect corporate stonewall. Airport security is a serious matter. We can't make exceptions that could compromise the safety of our passengers." He was using the language of procedure and safety to mask an act of pure prejudice. He was weaponizing the rules. The final boarding call for Flight 104 echoed through the terminal. The last few passengers scurried past them, pointedly avoiding eye contact. The gate agent at the adjacent counter began to close the heavy door to the jet bridge. "That's it, the flight is closed," Kevin announced with an air of finality. "There's nothing more I can do. You'll have to go back to the ticketing counter outside security to sort this out." He turned his back on them, dismissing them as if they were nothing more than a minor inconvenience, a piece of trash to be swept away. Brenda gave them a final triumphant smirk before turning back to her computer. The heavy door to the jet bridge clicked shut. On the other side of the glass, their plane, their connection to London and their father, sat tantalizingly close, its engines whining as it prepared to push back. They were stranded, humiliated, erased. Zola's eyes filled with tears of pure frustration. All her life, she had been protected. All her life, her father's name had been a shield. But here in the harsh, fluorescent light of a public terminal, they were powerless. They were just two girls who, in the eyes of Brenda and Kevin, didn't belong. Zara watched the plane, her face a mask of calm, but inside a cold, hard anger was solidifying. She had tried logic. She had tried reason. She had followed the rules. But the system they were up against wasn't logical. It wasn't reasonable. It was a wall, and she had just been slammed into it. She pulled out her phone. Her thumb hovered over her contacts. There was one number she had been instructed to use only in a true emergency. Their father had always been clear, not for a forgotten homework assignment, not for a silly argument with a friend. Only for when the world showed its true ugly face, and the shield was not enough. This Zara decided was a true emergency. She looked at the gate number B-24. She looked at Brenda's smug face. She looked at the closed door. Then she looked at her sister's tears. "It's okay, Zola," she whispered, her voice dangerously quiet. They closed the door. Now Dad's going to close the airport. She pressed the call button. The call connected on the first ring. Zara, is everything all right? Robert Devereux's voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of paternal radar that could detect the slightest tremor of distress in his children from 3,000 miles away. No, Dad, Zara said, her voice perfectly level, betraying none of the seismic anger churning within her. We're at JFK, Gate B24. Apex Air denied us boarding for Flight 104 to London. There was a pause. On the other end of the line, Robert was in a sterile conference room in a Canary Wharf skyscraper overlooking the Thames. He swiveled in his leather chair, his focus snapping entirely from the quarterly projections on the screen in front of him to the sound of his daughter's voice. Denied you. On what grounds? They said our tickets were fraudulent. Zara continued, her eyes locked on Kevin, who was now laughing about something with Brenda. They claimed the Ethelred corporate account has a fraud alert. They refused to verify it. The supervisor backed up the gate agent. They just closed the door on us. Robert Devereux was a man who operated on data, on logic, on systems. He built and managed one of the most complex tech empires on the planet. He understood that glitches happened, but he also understood people. He heard the unspoken words in his daughter's tone. They didn't believe us. They didn't see us. What are the names of the employees? He asked, his voice losing its warmth, becoming clipped and precise. The gate agent is Brenda. The supervisor is Kevin. Zara reported like a soldier relaying enemy positions. And the flight has already pushed back. No, Zara said, glancing out the window. The jet bridge is detached, but the plane is still at the gate. Good, Robert said. The word was cold, heavy, and full of terrible promise. Listen to me very carefully, Zara. Do not leave the gate. Do not speak to anyone else. Stay exactly where you are. I am handling this. He hung up without saying goodbye. Zara lowered the phone. Zola looked at her, wiping a tear from her cheek. What did he say? He said to wait, Zara replied. At gate B24, Kevin took a sip of his coffee. Brenda was tidying up her counter. The incident already forgotten. Just another pair of troublemakers dealt with. The departures board for their gate now read, Flight closed. The world had moved on. For approximately 90 seconds, nothing happened. Then a frantic squawk erupted from Brenda's radio. It was a voice she didn't recognize, high-pitched with panic. All Apex ground staff, all gates hold position. Repeat, hold all pushbacks. Do not let another aircraft leave the gate. Brenda and Kevin exchanged a confused look. Simultaneously, inside the cockpit of Flight 104, the captain was receiving a message directly from the Central Apex Operations Command Center in Dallas. It was a code red directive, something he had only seen in simulations. Apex 104, hold position at the gate. Do not initiate taxi. Stand by for executive orders. The captain stared at his first officer. Executive orders. We're a scheduled commercial flight, not Air Force One. Back in the terminal, every gate agent's phone began to ring. The main departure boards across the entire terminal flickered. The word on time next to every single Apex Air flight from JFK to LAX, from Chicago to Miami, was replaced with a single ominous word, delayed. Then a moment later, they all flickered again. Now they read, grounded. A ripple of confusion and anger spread through the terminal. Thousands of passengers suddenly had their travel plans vaporized. Phones were being pulled out. Angry voices were being raised at ticket counters. The controlled chaos of the airport was tipping into genuine mayhem. Robert Devereux had made 2 calls. The first was to Michael Price, the CEO of Apex Air. Robert didn't scream. He didn't threaten. He spoke in a voice that was eerily calm, which Price knew from their quarterly partnership calls was far more terrifying than any outburst. He explained in forensic detail what had just happened to his daughters. He gave their names, the flight number, the gate, and the employees involved. The second call was to his own company's aerospace division, the division that designed and managed the proprietary Ethelgrid logistics software that Apex Air and a dozen other airlines paid hundreds of millions of dollars a year to use. It was the digital backbone of their entire operation. His order was simple. Initiate a system-wide diagnostic hold on the Ethelgrid platform for our partner Apex Air, effective immediately. Cite a potential critical security flaw. I want every single one of their planes on the ground until I say otherwise. It was a corporate nuclear option. He had used the very system his company provided to paralyze the airline that had wronged his children. It was a breathtaking, terrifying display of power, the kind that could move markets and ruin companies with a single command. Back at gate B-24, a man in a pristine dark blue suit was now sprinting down the concourse, his shoes slapping against the polished floor. He was Desmond Cole, Apex Air's Vice President of East Coast Operations. His face was pale, and sweat beaded on his forehead. He skidded to a halt in front of the gate, his eyes wild with panic. He ignored Brenda and Kevin completely, his gaze scanning the area until it landed on the two teenage girls standing alone, watching the chaos unfold. He approached them cautiously, as if they were unexploded bombs. "Miss Devereaux?" he asked, his voice breathless. "Zola and Zara Devereaux." Zara nodded slowly. Desmond Cole looked like he was about to be physically ill. "On behalf of Apex Air, my God, please accept my most profound apologies. There has been a catastrophic misunderstanding." He was stammering, his corporate Polish cracking under the immense pressure. He turned to Brenda and Kevin, and the fear in his eyes was replaced by a rage so pure it was almost beautiful. "You too," he snarled. "You have no idea what you've just done." The jet bridge, which had been retracted, suddenly whirred back to life, extending slowly, inexorably back towards the door of Flight 104. The flight which had been closed was about to be reopened. For 2 passengers. The wall of authority had not just been breached, it had been pulverized into dust. The sound of the jet bridge reconnecting to the aircraft was a mechanical groan that echoed the collective gasp of the onlookers at nearby gates. The spectacle was unprecedented. An entire airline, frozen in its tracks, was now bending its will to reverse the decision of a single gate agent. Brenda and Kevin stood frozen, their faces a canvas of disbelief, shifting to dawning horror. The world they knew, a world of rules they could interpret, of power they could wield over weary travelers, was collapsing in on them. Kevin's clipboard slipped from his limp fingers and clattered to the floor. Desmond Cole, the VP, was still profusely apologizing to the twins. "Your father," he called Mr. Price directly. "We are rectifying this immediately. Your plane is waiting. Your seats are waiting." Zola, who had been silenced by shock, finally found her voice. "What about all the other flights? What about all these people?" She gestured to the packed terminal, where confusion was curdling into anger. "That," Desmond said grimly, "is being handled. The priority right now is you." Just then, the captain and first officer of Flight 104 emerged from the newly opened jet bridge door, their faces etched with confusion. They saw the VP, the 2 girls, and the shell-shocked gate agents. The captain, a veteran with 30 years in the cockpit, walked straight to Desmond. "What in God's name is going on? Des Operations Command is dark. They told us to hold for a corporate mandate. I've got 200 passengers on board, asking why we haven't pushed back." Desmond looked past the captain, towards Brenda and Kevin. His voice dropped to a low, venomous hiss. "Pack your personal belongings, both of you. Your IDs are revoked. An HR escort will meet you at the employee exit. You are terminated effective immediately." Brenda opened her mouth to protest, a reflexive gasp of defiance, but no words came out. The reality of the situation hit her like a physical force. 15 years of service, of seniority, of petty tyrannies at the gate, all of it erased in 15 seconds. Kevin simply stared, his face ashen, the color draining from it, as if he were bleeding out internally. The firing was brutal, public, and absolute. Several passengers were now recording the scene on their phones. The story was already taking shape online. Suddenly, a path cleared through the throng of onlookers. Two imposing men in dark suits appeared, first followed by Robert Devereaux himself. He wasn't supposed to be in New York. He had, in fact, just landed in his company's Gulfstream G650 at a nearby private airfield, having ordered his pilot to turn the jet around mid-flight over the Atlantic the moment he hung up with Zara. He wasn't running. He walked with a calm, deliberate stride that seemed to bend the chaos of the airport around him. He radiated an aura of immense controlled power. He ignored Desmond Cole, ignored the flight crew, and walked directly to his daughters. He placed a hand on each of their shoulders, his eyes scanning them for any sign of hurt, "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice soft for their ears only. Both girls just nodded, the adrenaline of the last hour finally giving way to the profound relief of seeing him. Only then did Robert turn his attention to the corporate wreckage around him. He looked at Desmond Cole. "Is the situation resolved?" "Yes, Mr. Devereaux." Desmond said, his voice straining. "Completely. They're ready to board at your convenience." Robert then looked for the first and only time at Brenda and Kevin, who were being flanked by airport security, their faces masks of public humiliation. He said nothing to them. He didn't need to. His very presence was a judgment. He had passed a sentence, not with anger, but with the cold, indifferent calculus of a CEO deleting a line of corrupted code. "Zola, Zara," Robert said, turning them towards the jet bridge. "Let's go to London." As they walked onto the plane, the first-class cabin crew greeted them with wide, terrified smiles. The other passengers stared, finally understanding that the two young girls they had seen being harassed at the gate were the cause of this global disruption. Once they were seated, Robert made one final call to his head of software engineering. "Release the hold." And just like that, across the country, the Ethelgrid system blinked back to life. Departure boards flickered from grounded back to delayed. The colossal machine of Apex Air began to slowly, painfully grind back into motion, but the damage was done. By the time Flight 104 was climbing over the Atlantic, the story had gone supernova. A passenger's video of Brenda and Kevin's public firing was on Twitter, racking up millions of views. The hashtags "Warj Apex Air Shame" and "Orchan Devereaux Daughters" were trending worldwide. News outlets from CNN to the BBC were scrambling to piece together the story of how one of the world's richest men had single-handedly grounded an entire airline to avenge the mistreatment of his children. Apex Air's stock was already in free fall in after-hours trading. Their PR department was in meltdown. In the quiet, rarefied air of the first-class cabin, Zola and Zara finally began to process the whiplash of the day. They had gone from humiliated victims to the epicenter of an international incident. They had felt powerless, and then they had witnessed a display of almost unimaginable power. It was a dizzying, unsettling feeling. Justice had been served swiftly and decisively. But as they looked out the window at the endless expanse of the night sky, a question lingered. Was this justice, or was it just a different kind of power play? The machine that had crushed them had been crushed in turn, but the machine itself was still there. And the world was full of girls who looked just like them, who didn't have a father who could stop the world for them. The reckoning had been spectacular, but the story they would soon realize was far from over. The viral explosion of the JFK incident was only the beginning. For the first 48 hours, the narrative was simple and satisfying. Racist employees get their comeuppance thanks to a powerful father. Apex Air issued a series of increasingly groveling public apologies. Brenda and Kevin became digital effigies, their faces plastered across tabloids and meme accounts, symbols of modern-day bigotry. Robert Devereaux was lauded in some circles as a hero father and castigated in others as a ruthless oligarch who treated a public company like his personal fiefdom. But in the crowded, messy ecosystem of the 24-hour news cycle, simple narratives rarely stay simple for long. The thread that would unravel everything was picked up by Penelope Shaw, an investigative journalist for the New York Ledger. Penelope wasn't interested in the viral outrage. She was interested in systems. She saw the story not as a drama about one family, but as a symptom of a deeper corporate sickness. Her guiding question wasn't, what did Brenda do? But why did Brenda feel so empowered to do it? Her first calls were to disgruntled former Apex Air employees. She found a rich vein of discontent. Most spoke off the record fearing corporate retaliation, but they all told a similar story. In the past 2 years, the company culture had shifted. A new aggressive focus on security and asset protection had been implemented from the top down. It started after they brought in Veritas Consulting, one former flight attendant told her. They rolled out this mandatory training program for all customer-facing staff. They called it Enhanced Security Profiling, or ESP. Penelope's journalistic instincts tingled. Veritas Consulting. The name was familiar, a high-priced, notoriously discreet firm that specialized in corporate restructuring and risk management. She dug into Veritas. They had no public client list, but by cross-referencing SEC filings and industry reports, she found their fingerprints on several major corporations that had recently faced discrimination lawsuits. A pattern began to emerge. Veritas would come in, promising to streamline operations and enhance security, and what followed was often a trail of HR complaints and legal trouble. The real breakthrough came from a source deep inside Apex Air's corporate headquarters in Dallas, a mid-level HR manager who was horrified by the Devereaux incident and felt a moral obligation to speak out. Anonymously, he forwarded Penelope a series of internal documents. Among them was the entire training manual for the ESP program. Penelope spent a night poring over the 100-page PDF, her highlighter running dry. The language was couched in sterile corporate jargon, non-traditional revenue streams, high-risk passenger indicators, asset loss mitigation. But the subtext was chillingly clear. The program trained employees to identify suspicious passengers based on a checklist of deeply biased criteria. The indicators included things like passengers flying on routes inconsistent with their apparent socioeconomic profile, use of high-value corporate credit cards by individuals who did not fit the executive demographic, traveling with luxury goods that seemed disproportionate to their appearance, an overly detailed or rehearsed-sounding knowledge of their travel plans. It was a step-by-step guide to institutionalizing prejudice. It gave employees like Brenda a corporate-sanctioned framework to justify their ugliest instincts. Zola and Zara Devereaux, two articulate, well-dressed black teenagers flying first class on a corporate account, had ticked nearly every box on the biased checklist. Their poise, their intelligence, their very presence in that privileged space had been twisted into evidence against them. But the most damning document was a signed contract. It showed the executive who had championed and signed off on bringing in Veritas Consulting to implement the ESP program. The signature belonged to Kevin, the very same supervisor who had smugly backed Brenda's decision at the gate. He hadn't just been a shift supervisor. He was the regional director of customer experience, and the ESP program was his pet project. His role as a shift supervisor that day had been part of a management in the trenches initiative he himself had created. Penelope felt a jolt of electricity. This went far beyond one bad employee. This was a story of systemic rot deliberately implemented. But why? Why would a company pay millions for a program that was a lawsuit waiting to happen? The anonymous source provided the final devastating piece of the puzzle, a series of flagged expense reports from Kevin submitted to the Veritas Consulting Group. They were coded as implementation support, but the amounts were staggering, paid out to a shell corporation. It was a classic kickback scheme. Kevin wasn't just a bigot, he was a crook. He had championed this toxic program because Veritas was paying him a fortune under the table to do it. He had poisoned the culture of his own company for personal profit. Penelope Shaw now had everything she needed. She had the training manuals, the source inside HR, the contract with Kevin's signature, and the evidence of financial corruption. The story was no longer about two girls and a gate agent. It was about a deliberate, profitable, and malicious system designed to target people just like them. She began to type. The headline forming in her mind was explosive. The apex rot: how a secret training program and executive corruption led to the JFK standoff. The world thought the story had ended with Brenda and Kevin's firing. In reality, the true reckoning was just about to begin. Penelope Shaw's article landed like a precision-guided bomb. Published on the front page of the New York Ledger's website, it was a meticulous, damning exposé that systematically dismantled Apex Air's rogue employees narrative. It laid bare the rotten foundation beneath the company's polished exterior, the biased ESP training program, the toxic culture it fostered, and the corrupt kickback scheme orchestrated by Kevin. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. The story was picked up by every major news network. Apex Air's stock, which had stabilized, now plummeted into a nosedive, wiping out billions in market value. The CEO, Michael Price, who had been praised for his swift apology, was now seen as either complicit or grossly incompetent. He was forced to resign within 24 hours. For Brenda, the world had already shrunk to the four walls of her small apartment in Queens. She had been a pariah before, a villain in a viral video. Now she was a footnote in a much larger scandal, her personal racism revealed as a mere symptom of a corporate disease. She tried to frame herself as a victim, telling any local news crew that would listen that she was just following the training. She filed a wrongful termination lawsuit against Apex Air. Her lawsuit was DOA. Apex, in a desperate attempt at damage control, released a statement condemning the unauthorized and unethical program, and threw Kevin, and by extension, Veritas Consulting under the bus. They provided their entire file on the ESP training to the court, showing how it had been implemented. Brenda's own signed acknowledgements of completing the training were in the file. Her case was dismissed before it ever saw a courtroom. The training she claimed to be following was now Exhibit A in a federal investigation. The public shaming was relentless. She couldn't get a job. Her face was too recognizable. She lost her apartment and had to move in with her sister in a different state, her 15 years of service culminating in infamy and financial ruin. The petty power she had cherished was gone, replaced by the crushing powerlessness she had inflicted on others. This was the first harvest of karma, a quiet, desperate withering. For Kevin, the karma was a far more dramatic and public affair. Penelope's article had not just exposed his corporate malfeasance, it had documented his financial crimes. The FBI, already alerted by a whistleblower call from Penelope's anonymous source, raided his suburban New Jersey home at dawn. News helicopters hovered overhead, capturing images of federal agents carrying out boxes of documents and computer equipment. Kevin, the man who had smugly lectured the Devereaux twins about security and procedure, was led from his house in handcuffs, his face a mask of shocked indignation. He was charged with wire fraud, conspiracy, and money laundering. The kickbacks from Veritas Consulting totaled over $2 million. He had sold his company's soul and endangered its very existence for a new boat and a luxury SUV. His defense was a pathetic spectacle. He tried to claim the payments were legitimate consulting fees, but the Shell Corporation and the offshore accounts told a different story. His former colleagues, eager to distance themselves from the scandal, testified against him. Veritas Consulting, facing its own federal investigation and a slew of lawsuits from other companies, cut him loose completely, painting him as a lone, greedy executive who had extorted them. 6 months later, a humbled and broken Kevin stood before a federal judge. He was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to 7 years in federal prison. As the bailiff led him away, he looked like a ghost of the man who had stood at gate B24. His authority, his smugness, his confidence, all stripped away, leaving behind a hollow shell. His karma was not a slow withering, but a swift, brutal reaping. He had weaponized a corrupt system for personal gain, and in the end, a different, more powerful system had consumed him whole. The impact rippled outwards. Apex Air, under new leadership, was forced to scrap the ESP program and spend hundreds of millions on a corporate-wide retraining and diversity initiative overseen by a court-appointed monitor. They settled a massive class action lawsuit filed by hundreds of other passengers who had been unfairly targeted by the program, the evidence for which was now a matter of public record. The story had reached its brutal logical conclusion for the antagonists. Their lives were irrevocably shattered. But for the Devereaux family, the echoes of that day at JFK were pushing them not toward vengeance, but toward a profound and unexpected transformation. The news of Kevin's sentencing broke on a Tuesday evening. In the soundproofed media room of their New York brownstone, the Devereaux family watched the segment on a screen the size of a wall. The news anchor spoke in grave tones about corporate corruption, and justice served, showing the now famous image of Kevin being led away in handcuffs, his face a pasty mask of disbelief. There was no celebration in the room, no triumphant cheers. The air was thick with a heavy, somber silence. Zola sat curled on a plush sofa, tracing patterns on the velvet cushion with her finger. Her gaze was fixed on the screen, but her expression was distant, as if she were watching a story about strangers. Zara sat perfectly still in an armchair, her hands clasped in her lap, her face a study in calm contemplation. She was analyzing, processing, seeing the final gear of a destructive machine click into place. Robert stood near the back of the room, a glass of untouched water in his hand. He watched the report, but his eyes kept flicking towards his daughters. He saw the victory society was proclaiming, but he also saw the invisible scars the ordeal had left on them. The vindication felt thin, brittle. It was the closing of a chapter, yes, but the book remained unsettlingly open. The downfall of 2 people felt less like a solution and more like a symptom, and the disease remained deeply rooted in the world outside their door. Later that night, long after the girls had gone to their rooms, Robert found himself in his library. It was his sanctuary, a room lined with first editions and technological treatises, a testament to a life built on logic and ambition. But tonight, the books offered no comfort. He bypassed his massive mahogany desk and walked to the mantelpiece where a silver-framed photograph sat. It was of Zola and Zara at age 7, all missing teeth and joyous identical smiles, their arms thrown around his neck. He had built an empire to give them the world to construct a fortress of opportunity and privilege so high that no harm could ever reach them. He had failed. He replayed Zara's call in his mind, the terrifying calm in her voice, a testament to a strength he hadn't known she'd been forced to build. He remembered the blinding white-hot rage that had coursed through him, a fury that had allowed him to paralyze an entire corporation with 2 phone calls. In the moment, it had felt like justice. Now, in the quiet of his library, it felt like a colossal failure of imagination. He had used a sledgehammer to fix a watch. His power, he realized with a sickening clarity, was a blunt instrument. It could demolish, but it couldn't heal. It could punish, but it couldn't teach. It was the language of force, not the language of progress. The next evening he asked the girls to join him in the library. He didn't sit behind the imposing desk that separated him from the world. Instead, he sat with them in the worn leather armchairs near the unlit fireplace, creating a circle of equals. He took a deep breath, the silence stretching for a long moment, before he found the words. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice quiet but resonant in the wood-paneled room. Zola looked up, a flicker of the old fire in her eyes. "For what, Dad? You fixed it. Kevin's in jail. Brenda's life is ruined. They're gone. Isn't that what we wanted?" Her voice wasn't accusatory, but laden with a weary frustration that was older than her 16 years. "No," Robert said, shaking his head slowly, the weight of his realization settling in his voice. "That's what I did. It's not the same as fixing it. I didn't fix it. I just broke it harder than they did." He leaned forward, his gaze meeting each of theirs in turn. "I used overwhelming force to solve a problem that never should have existed in the first place. My entire life, I thought that building success was the answer. I thought that if I gave you every advantage, every comfort, you would be safe. But I was wrong. I built a shield, but I never taught you about the battle. The world will still see you before anything else, and it will judge you. I didn't prepare you for that. I didn't even truly see it myself." The raw honesty of his confession hung in the air. It was an apology not for the incident, but for his own blindness. It was Zara who broke the silence, her voice carrying a newfound weight, the quiet observer finally taking the floor. "You couldn't see it, Dad. Not the way we do. But we did. We always have." She paused, then continued, giving voice to a lifetime of quiet indignities. "The little things. The way store clerks follow us in shops you own. The surprise on teachers' faces when we ace a physics exam. The security guard at the museum who asked to see our membership card 3 times. None of it was a big deal, not like the airport. But it was all the same thing. What happened at JFK wasn't new. It was just louder." Her words landed with devastating precision. It was one thing to understand prejudice as a concept. It was another to realize his own children had been navigating a minefield he hadn't even been able to perceive. That conversation became the catalyst. The lingering anger and humiliation began to transmute, forged by their shared honesty, into a sharp, gleaming sense of purpose. A few weeks later, the dining room table was not set for dinner, but was covered in flowcharts, legal pads, and market research. The 3 of them were no longer father and victims, but a team of architects designing a new flight plan. The press conference was held in a packed auditorium. Robert Devereaux, flanked by his 2 daughters, announced the formation of the Devereaux Initiative for Equitable Futures, funded with an initial endowment of $1 billion. His speech made it clear this was not mere charity. Power should not be a weapon used to avenge a personal wrong. He stated, his voice ringing with conviction. It should be a tool used to dismantle the systems that create those wrongs in the first place. The initiative's mission was twofold. First, it would provide robust, no-strings-attached funding for the kind of investigative journalism that held power to account. Its first official act was to award a multi-million-dollar grant to Penelope Shaw and her team at the New York Ledger, empowering them to build a dedicated unit for exposing corporate and systemic discrimination. Second, the initiative would establish a tech incubator to partner with the world's brightest minds, developing open-source AI auditing tools to identify and eliminate bias in the algorithms that increasingly governed modern life. And in a move that surprised everyone, he named Zola and Zara as co-chairs of the Youth Advisory Board, giving them a direct voice in shaping the future of their own legacy. The experience had irrevocably changed them. Zola, once absorbed by the ephemeral world of trends, discovered her voice in activism. She channeled her formidable energy into creating the initiative's social media presence, storyboarding a powerful campaign she titled Louder, inspired by her sister's words. It was a series of slick, compelling videos that shared the stories of everyday microaggressions, making the invisible visible. She had a unique gift for translating righteous anger into viral change. Zara the Quiet Storm had found her calling at the nexus of technology, law, and justice. She devoured courses in constitutional law and machine learning, her brilliant mind finding its purpose in the complex code of society. She began drafting the initiative's ethical framework for algorithmic auditing, her notes filled with a passion that was both intellectual and deeply personal. She had stood powerless before a gate of prejudice, and now she was dedicating her life to writing the code that would tear those gates down for everyone. They never flew Apex Air again, not out of spite, but because they were on a different journey now. The brutal ordeal at JFK had been an unscheduled, traumatizing detour, but it had ultimately forced them onto a new, more meaningful flight path. They had been denied their seats, so they decided to redesign the whole airport. The karma that had struck down Brenda and Kevin was a finite, explosive event, a reckoning that had faded with the news cycle. The change the Devereaux family now championed was quieter, more deliberate, and designed to be permanent, a systemic course correction, to ensure that no one else would have to burn down the world to be seen, because the world itself had finally learned how to open its eyes. The story of Zola and Zara Devereaux isn't just about the dramatic clash of power and prejudice at an airport gate. It's a stark reminder of how deeply bias can be woven into the very systems we rely on every day. It shows that for every public act of discrimination, we see there are often hidden corporate policies and a culture of complicity that allows it to happen. The swift and devastating karma that befell the airline employees is a cautionary tale about accountability, but the real lesson lies in what happened next. True justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about the hard, necessary work of systemic change. The Devereaux family used their immense power not just to win one battle, but to fund a war against the quiet injustices that happen every day to people who don't have a CEO on speed dial. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And for more deep dives into stories that expose the hidden mechanics of our world, make sure you subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell. What are your thoughts on corporate responsibility and the power of individuals to fight back? Let me know in the comments below.